Alright, so when it comes to my favorite plugins, I'm definitely gonna show you a couple of my favorite plugins. And I won't be doing any what do you call it? Demonstrations today. I'll do that in a later video, but I'm just gonna get this started and show a couple plugins that I believe are my favorite and a couple of their uses. First off, I'm gonna start with the EQ, and it is the F6. Most of these are Waves plugins. So if you have Waves Ultimate, you're gonna have most of these. If not, Waves has a lot of sales. You can grab some plugins that were previously a couple years ago like 300 a pop. Like you can get it like for 20 bucks now. Sometimes even cheaper. Like in F6, you might be able to get it for like 15. I'm not sure right now. Alright, so F6 there's an RTA, that just means real time analyzer. You're gonna see like the waveforms pop up, but definitely what I like about this is, as you can see, it's a dynamic EQ. So let's say I'm on a vocal track, right? I don't like the sibilants, but I don't want to use a de-esser since it's not that big of a problem. But you just want to cut out a little bit of sibilants. What I can do is I can take the Q, that's the quality factor, take it down to here. Usually around like sibilants, that's like you want to take out is around anything from 2K to 8K. Usually even songs down to 250 or around like 500 is like main vocal ranges. But anything above that is usually the sibilants and brightness. You'd boost that up using probably like another EQ or just some saturation. But what you can do is like this is you can see the gain. I may not even want any gain on it, but I could put a threshold. Let's say I put it at -20. So that means anything in this frequency range that goes at least to -20 decibels is going to be brought down by however range I want. And you're going to see it'll start moving itself down like this automatically. So that's an EQ I like. And you can also sidechain a EQ2. So let's say you have a bus, which is a drum bus. Let's say you want this frequency range on the vocals to be brought down for the snare just slightly. If you think it's interfering for whatever reason, the snare is usually sit around 2K to 4K, usually around here. What I can do is I can set this sidechain source to external and select a bus or whatever one you have that is feeding from the drums or whatever instrument you want to do, and it'll function the same way. So the threshold won't be off of the track you have it on. The threshold will be off the sidechain input. Another plugin I like is another EQ. It is the Pultec EQP1A. This is just included with Pro Tools. It functions the same way for either one. I prefer the Pultec EQP1A. Is the exact same thing, almost functions the same way. This is a Waves plugin. It's on the Jack Joseph Puig collection. But what I like about it is the little harmonic saturation sounds. It's a little staticky noises that you hear, like typically on like tape recorded and analog equipment. It's good. Basically, how it works is there's an attenuation and a boost. What you do with that is you can select the frequency. Let's say you want to add some brightness to the signal, usually on vocals. I would put it probably around 12 or 16. Let's say for this case we're gonna do a 12, and I'm gonna boost it by a factor of 3. Just so you know, these are not decibels. These are not anything else. It's just a factor. That just means it's just the units on here, basically. It has nothing to do with any level or anything. Let's say I want to boost just slightly, it'll be a 2. But then, let's say, because I'm bringing the high frequencies around 12K up way too much, let's say I want to boost, attenuate, which means to decrease another thing to make it even. I can go to around, let's say, 10K now I feel it's too bright, or even 20K I want to bring down a little bit to make it a little cleaner. I can attenuate. Let's say I want to do this like kind of heavily, so now we have a more sculpted sound. And the bandwidth, what it does is basically it is the Q. Broad would be a wider, and sharp is obviously more precise. That means if I have it at 0, it's only affecting 12K. If I have it at, let's say, like a 5, it's probably affecting around 10 to 14K. so that's a little broader, and that it would probably be even from 8 to 16, which is pretty broad. That's a plugin I love. Another one is a compressor. It's a CLA 76. This is an emulation of the LA 76, and as you can see, it's in the Chris Lord-Alge classic collection. As you can see right there. But what I like about it is it's just crisp, and if you actually heard an actual LA 76, it sounds pretty accurate. One thing about this one though, there is no actual sidechain on it. That's the downside, but in this case you wouldn't really need it. It just functions pretty well, and there's the analog saturation. That's the little tss sounds you hear. Pretty good. There's a mix thing on that. Pretty straightforward compressor. Another thing I like is the L1 limiter. It's pretty straightforward, just a limiter. I like how it functions. It looks like this probably. I feel like this is a little bit too much on the screen. It distracts me a little bit. I like a little straightforward. You can change it to the legacy look. I like this part personally, but obviously I know. Another thing there is the L1 Plus Ultra Maximizer, and what it does is you can quantize it. I usually like to turn that off if I don't need it. As dithering and then noise shaping, which basically, in terms of loudness, let's say you have a output ceiling of -3.5. What it's gonna do is, let's say you have a pretty loud bass, it's gonna shape or move some of those low frequencies, like the really low frequencies, around to other frequency areas that sound less harsh. It knows something with which frequencies are less harsher to the ear, and it moves it around to make it sound lower. And another thing you can do is the domain. This is my favorite part of this limiter. Especially I'm going to put this on a master bus, and if I'm doing some Apple Digital mastering works, obviously it can't clip at all. No intersample peaks, which is a little bit harder to do. But analog is a little more analog sounding, obviously. It's a little less accurate. True peak is what I like though. So let's say I put a -1. The output ceiling is going to be -1 true peak, which is very accurate if you're working with, like, you need to hit a certain area. Another thing I like, this is probably my favorite compressor, maybe of all time. This is the SSL compressor. It is based off of a actual SSL board. As you can see, it's in the SSL series. I put the SSL channel. It's right here, and usually this is just like one channel. It's put around a little bit. It's laid out a little bit differently for this plugin. And there's the analog here. This is a pretty good plugin too. You can't go wrong with it. If you can't get something sounding good with this, usually something with the recording, or if you're mastering, it's something wrong with the mix. And the presets they're amazing. They're all pretty good, except one tip: don't live off of presets. You can use presets. Let's say you have a snare drum. You might find, oh, I'm gonna go look for a snare. Okay, so we have a snare one right here. This might sound good for what the mixing engineer here usually works on, those artists, but it may not sound good for your music. Always tweak and figure out what the issue is. But going back to the right here, the SSL compressor. This is a beautiful compressor. It almost sounds just as good as the actual analog version of it, which is, the board itself is over $2,000. Sometimes, like, if you get an actual, like, rack to, those could be $20K. That's like Pro Studios have that. But you can turn the analog on, that adds some of the analog, like, saturation sounds I told you about. It's great. Function as any master bus compressor. Obviously here, fast attack. What it does, that means basically how attack works. You guys probably know this. How it works is when sound reaches a certain threshold, which is in this case 10 decibels. Let's say the sound gets to 10 decibels. That's when the compressor is going to kick in. The attack is how fast it reaches that threshold. The release is how fast it returns back to normal. So usually what I like to do is put like a pretty slow release and a decently a pretty fast release and a decently slow attack. usually put on. If you see some of my presets I have, one of the presets I have right here, I like to use these, but I might use one of these. So you see I have pretty slow attack and an automatic release on this one. I like to place this on my master bus a lot, but I tweak it always. Makeup gain is just, you guys know what that is, most likely. That's just gain to make up for the compression. Let's say you're compressing something heavily, like around 8 decibels of compression. You're going to want to put that up to maybe 4 to get half of that back. Otherwise it's going to sound low and pumped. Definitely another thing I like is the R compressor. I don't find myself using this too much, but this is a great vocal compressor. I mean, the presets on it are pretty great, and you can't really go wrong with it. It sounds great. One other thing I definitely love using is find it 1 second. Oops. This is a more of a Dolby and like spatial thing, but I feel like this is such a great plugin. I'm gonna have to make another video on this probably. But this is Sound Particles Energy Pen. I believe it is available for like $110. Not too cheap, but pretty great for what it is. So it's an update, huh? But the presets on here are pretty cool. How it works is it goes up all the way up to, if you look on here, I mean, it goes in 9.6, even Sony 360, which I'm not sure if they use that anymore. It used to be on Tidal. I don't think it is anymore. There's a 6th order ambisonics. That is some crazy VR stuff. That is, find your own video on that. I don't even understand it, but that's just pretty crazy. That it's pretty much future proof. It has all these things: binaural, bloom lane, mid side processing stereo, and XY processing stereo, and just normal stereo. In this case, we use stereo, left, right, but I like the binaural too. And how it works is you can select a specific point you like to start at, and you can move it towards another location, which this would be the back, and a surround, obviously it's moving to the back. This would be moving to the height channels or into the center of the surround space, determining on whatever your surround setup is. This is great. How it works is you set a certain threshold. So it's called energy panner. Basically it goes off of loudness. The louder something gets, the faster it pans it and the more it pans it. There's some cool effects with that. I love that one. Another one I definitely like is it's another compressor. It is the CLA2A. I love this for parallel compression, and it also functions as a limiter. I'm not sure how much I like it though. This is supposed to be an LA2A emulation, and it functions pretty much the same way as the other compressors, but it just has that warmth and the sound. It's great. Another thing I find myself using sometimes is the DPR 402. This basically is a distressor, and it also has a compressor and peak limiter built into it. I personally love this plugin. The presets on it, they're okay, but basically, let's say we have a drums preset. Okay, snare punch. It just adds some kind of warmth to it. You have a lot of control almost over everything. It's almost like a master bus, like a SSL channel in the amount of like terms of control. You have EQ on it, and it just has some great warmth to it. Another one, Puig Child 670, pretty straightforward. This is great for a lot of hip hop, a lot of boom bap, a lot of even some rock, I believe. Yep, looks like rock and boom bap. Great on the master bus, definitely. Pretty straightforward, great compressor. Another thing I like to use is there's 2 de-essers I usually use. Usually for normal de-essing, I'll just use the de-esser right here. Works pretty well. There's a frequency, and you could also use, what I like to use is the syllabus, and this is great. You have basically a threshold. You'll see the waveform along here, and they just have a lot of great de-essing things, like almost like an emulation of like a pop filter. Not even an emulation, it functions pretty much in the same way. especially for rough vocals. This gets out a lot of things. You have wide and split stereo processing too, which is great. It just functions amazing, and it has look ahead as well. So if you have some rough syllabants, you can take that out. Works great. One thing though, I would not use it over a normal de-esser. Normal de-essers are a little bit smoother, I believe. This adds almost a little bit of tinniness and some resonance. That's the only thing I've noticed with it, but other than that, it sounds pretty great. On the vocal bus, Vocal Rider, this is great. You can set the track to latch and put it on right, and basically it is an attenuator. So let's say your track volume goes up. Because I set the target to pretty low, you're going to see how this functions. I think you might have to put sound on it. But basically, let's say you're on the meter, your vocals are peaking around here. Let's say you want it to go down here for whatever reason, and this almost works as a compressor in the same way. It's an attenuator though. If you set the target to let's set it to -20. That's what you want your vocals to go to. It'll go to that. You can change the range. That's basically the dynamic range. This being, it will jump, the levels will jump like this. It'll keep going up. If you want it smaller, it almost compresses it. But it's great just to have almost like a transparent. I like the Auto VCA and Smart Attenuator. I also have my own preset for ad-libs. This one, usually I like to keep them pretty low, but this kind of keeps some of that expression in it. Another thing I like to use is another EQ. This is the SSL EQ, and if you're just looking for a straightforward EQ, don't want to get distracted, this would do you right. The analog on it is just that warmth, because it's an emulation of a actual mixing board. But yeah, that's great. I'm gonna say for reverbs, I mean, there's so many reverbs, but probably some of my favorites is the IRL. How this works is impulse responses. That's what the IR is. But what I like the best about it is you can import your own impulse response. This is especially good for sound design. It's another tool you can use. It works as a convoluter reverb. So let's say you like two specific sounds. You're determining between them. You like the way a certain synth sounds, but you like the way another synth hits, but not as much as the actual sound. You could take the impulse response of whatever it has to be, whatever the synth sound is, and have that as the impulse response. How that works is it's gonna almost recreate the sound into that, and you can take the dry wet, and there's a bunch of great sounding things here. Usually one of my favorite ones is the Aquarium. I made my own preset right here, Aquarium Pro, as called it. But the Aquarium sounds pretty good. It's interesting. Warm Room is okay, but Small Room is great. Another reverb I like is the Abbey Road plates, not Abbey Road chambers. I'm not a fan of that. But this just has some great warmth to it, and the analog. The presets here pretty great. I find myself using one more like this that I made myself. But for the vocals, I also like, it is just called short plate. It's not that bad. For delays, I mean, there's a lot of great delays. H delay, I know a lot of people who use this. Great tempo-based delay, which is pretty great. It just works pretty well. It's very analog sounding, which is good. Right there. Different sounds too of the analog if you like a certain warmth sound. But oftentimes I just find myself using Pro Tools' Mod Delay 3. It just works great. I like the this one. You can sync it to the tempo, which is great. So as you see, let's say you set the project tempo to 66 BPM. It's going to change to 66 BPM, and this is just a great straightforward delay, and I love it. For harmonics, there's a lot in harmonics, and I feel like there's a lot of things you can do. Let's talk on the master bus first. This, one of my favorite plugins, definitely. I mean, it sounds just like a real tape thing. One thing it does, the drive though, does slam the track, and that will make it sound very bassy, and it kind of messes up the mix a lot. So what I would do is keep it low. You're gonna look at one of the presets I made. This one I'm aiming for around a 6 decibel push, so around here. How much it's pushing is pretty low. Usually I'll have to drag this up. I start it low and I bring it up as much as I need, usually when I'm looking for a certain gain level. But this just adds, I keep the noise very low too, but it just makes it sound like it's more analog and just better. I will use that. Another thing I use is the Magma BB tubes, the Beauty and the Beast tubes more specifically. These are great. Beauty is a very defined high end and mid sounding tube, and the Beast brings out the low end and almost sounds like it's attenuating a bit of the mids, which is really good. I like the way it functions. There's a dry wet on it, and there's some tone, which pre-tone that just brings the highs up a little bit, and or you can bring it down obviously. And the post is after. I have not fooled around with that much, but I'm assuming it's great. There's also 2 types, different sounds. I found that type A sounds a little bit brighter and type B sounds a little bit darker in terms of sound, but that's what I like. Bass relief, how this functions is a little weird, but what bass relief is it doesn't drive the bass as much. Putting more higher would basically be like no drive in the bass. Put it around here, there'd be a little bit less. This is just specifically for bass frequencies, which in this case I believe are just right here around this range. If I'm gonna show one last plugin, I'm definitely gonna say is the, where is it? Master Meter, just by Pro Tools, and this is a great plugin. I find that when especially I'm doing Apple Digital Masters tasks, you can use Apple's AF clip, but since I'm on Windows, and if you're a Windows user, you don't have that. Oversampling, basically, let's say you're at a 48K sample rate. That's what I use usually. Sometimes I work in 96K, but a 48K is usually what they're using. Sometimes 44.1. Oversampling multiplies that sample rate that many times. So I'm not sure off the top of my head what that is, but basically 44.1 thousand times 8 is what the sample rate it is monitoring it in. Basically, that checks for any intersample peaks, which basically means peaking that is and clipping that is not detected by a normal limiter. That especially is important for conversion down to lossy formats, because usually when you're mixing, you're working in a lossless format. That's a studio quality wave. Not all platforms support that, and to be honest, not all devices support that. And I don't know if you guys don't know, but whenever you're listening to music on your headphones, it is compressed down because it cannot have a lossless that means no like change in the audio quality over the Bluetooth. It just doesn't work. It compresses it down to usually an AAC for AirPods and for like most devices. And Apple Music has lossless, but if you're going to be having other platforms like Spotify, which I would argue is probably a little more used, I personally like Apple Music. That's a different debate. But Spotify is used. They use an Opus format, which is a lossy, which means there's some compression to take the file size down. And when it converts it down, when it's compressing and chopping off some of the information to make the file size smaller, it's taking some of that loudness up, so it brings it back up by normalizing it. However, let's say you have a mix at -1, which is around here on the meter. Just because it's -1 in a lossless, when it gets compressed down, it might push it back up when it normalizes it to above 0, which makes it clip and distort at loud volumes. This sees that, and you'll see it'll come up on here, which is great. Alright, now for this section of the video, I'm just going to start off going over what I believe if you can only get a certain amount of plugins from this video, or if you should only use, and honestly, I find myself only using these mainly. My favorite EQ of all time this right here. And this is a basic EQ. Pro Tools one is great. I love Avid's EQ. It just works how you need it to. However you need it to function, it just does that. It's great. Everything I need to do. It's just amazing. This is the most straightforward EQ, and it's great. All I can say about it. This EQ, great too. I use it just solely as a dynamic. I don't use it as much as for actual EQ. I usually just use the EQ7, EQ3 7 band. But that's what I say. For master bus compressor, SSL comp, straightforward compressor, legendary sound, great emulation of the master bus. That's solid state logic. It is great. CLA 76, amazing for vocals. Bluey's a brighter, more clear sound. Blackie's a little more grungy and more like aggressive, dark tone to it. Great compressor, functions well, does what you need it to do. Another thing, if we're gonna go to more of EQs, I use this Tweaktech. This is just great. You have to find a video, and I'll probably make another one another day, explaining how a Pultec works, because it's a little bit of a funky EQ curve it does, but it is genius and it works great. The tube character in this EQ is beautiful. It really, like, if you're adding some of that crispiness in the high end, making that brighter, you're gonna notice it. I usually work with a 7 on vocals, sometimes tone it down a little bit, down to a 4 sometimes. Sounds great. I use it on drums, sometimes bass, and always vocals. Great EQ. Reverbs, Abbey Road plates. This is my favorite EQ. I'm sorry. Reverb. It's just does what it needs to do and has some great tonality and almost like, I don't know how to describe it, but it has amazing character in it. One last thing for vocals, the DPR 402, which is basically a distressor. Does what it needs to do. Great compressor, especially for vocals and drums. Alright, I guess that concludes it for this video today. Good luck with your mixes. I'm going to be coming out with some more videos in the future. Peace.